This is the story of our voyage that we made along the Danube in August 2024. The weather by and large was warm and dry, although we did see some dramatic thunder and lightning in the distance, and we learned that Vienna had actually flooded after we left. We saw some beautiful countryside, especially in the Wachau Valley, and some magnificent cities like this, Budapest. The cruise started in Vienna, then went upstream to Melk, then back downstream to Krems in the Wachau Valley, then through Vienna again as we made our way to Bratislava in Slovakia, then into Hungary, first Esztergom and then Budapest at the end of the voyage. But it all started here in a very rainy, cool Manchester, and we had to spend an awful lot of time hanging about in Schiphol Airport before we get to Vienna. By the time we got to the boat, it was very late, very dark, but we had this beautiful view from our cabin window. And here's the view across the Danube following morning. In the afternoon, we went for a walking tour of Vienna with our friendly guide. Vienna is a big, impressive city, full of fine buildings. We didn't really warm to it. And because we'd arrived so late, there wasn't time to go to the Belvedere Museum. This is the closest we got to seeing Gustav Klimt. But when we got back to the boat, it seemed someone had found out it was our 50th wedding anniversary. Overnight we travelled upstream to Melk, so this was the scene that greeted us the following morning. The little town of Melk is dominated by Melk Abbey. Danube doesn't go short of abbeys generally. This one was founded in 1089. Access to the town is via this bridge. So this is a lifting bridge. It could be lifted out of the way of the floods. So originally a team of men would hoist it up and it took 4 hours. Now it's electric. And there's Melk Abbey overlooking it. Melk is a pretty little town, flooding quite frequently apparently, which is why the bridge had to be lifted up so often. This is the market square, all very nice and cosy. The locals look remarkably welcoming, but not all that talkative. But we soon left Melk to go back downstream to the twin towns of Krems and Stein. This part of the Danube, the Wachau Valley, is particularly beautiful. It's a great wine growing area. And that evening we moored up in Krems, but actually it's Stein. Stein and Krems, pretty much the same place though. And that evening, before dinner, I wandered around Stein to see what was there. I really like the look of this caricature museum. Sure, I used to know her. Sadly, it was late into the evening, so there was no chance of going round. The place was just closing, so I just had to go back for some drinks and food. Perhaps not so much as this bloke. The next morning we went to Gottfried Abbey. Now the abbey has been a monastery for about 1,000 years, but this massive Baroque building really was 18th century after a massive fire. It's got one of the biggest Baroque staircases in the world. Very impressive. The staircase is topped by this fantastic ceiling by Paul Truger. What? No, I've never heard of him either. So it's huge and it's grand. Maria Theresa spent a lot of time here, you can probably see why. Napoleon popped in as well. On a clear day, which obviously this isn't, there are magnificent views in all directions. Godvak Abbey is known as the Austrian Monte Cassino. Back in Krems, we did a tour of the city. Krems has been continuously occupied since prehistoric times. This is the Steiner Tor, the only surviving gate tower of the city. We were told the story of a young woman who was told by her parents to dump her boyfriend or clear off. Young girl chose option B, and here we see the grieving parents when they realised they'd messed up. Not sure what that street sign does in terms of the story. And then we're back on the river again. We're going downstream towards Slovakia and the city of Bratislava. And nothing to do for the whole afternoon but drink wine, eat Apfelstrudel, and watch the view. After dinner we were treated to a bit of a light show. Didn't rain on us, but Vienna copped it heavily, and there was some flooding, we understand. Next morning we found ourselves moored up in Bratislava. After being slightly misdirected by one of the crew, we found ourselves walking through, well, perhaps the longer way round to get to the old town. We're seeing here the university and some really nice buildings, so it wasn't all bad. Finally we found this, Michael's Gate, the only gate to the city left standing. So at last we were in the old town. Here's the main square with the old town hall. That strange looking archway squirts cooling water onto hot tourists. There are lots of quirky statues around Bratislava, like this one. Lynn doesn't look too happy with her pal. We decided to go into the back streets next and work our way up to the old city walls and then on to Bratislava Castle. The trouble with castles is people will put them on the top of dirty great hills. That may make sense if you're warding off invaders, but as tourists on a hot day we found it's all a bit much. No doubt to the disgust of the Grand Old Duke of York. When we were only halfway up, we went and had a beer and then went back down again. Now that weird thing in the background is called the UFO Observation Tower. They must know something we don't. That evening we set off again, this time for Ostrogon in Hungary. On the way we encountered this huge lake where the Danube widens out just south of Bratislava, and in the sky the August supermoon. Quite magical just to sit out on deck with a glass of wine, take it all in. Next morning we found ourselves moored in the shadow of Esztergom Basilica, another one of those great big cathedrals along the banks of the Danube. Esztergom was once the capital of Hungary, but walking around the town seemed to be a little bit down at heel. It does boast this magnificent statue of composer Franz Liszt, noted for his music and of course his invaluable contribution to Cockney rhyming slang. We were due to leave that evening for Budapest, but we were told we couldn't go because it was St. Stephen's Day and they needed our mooring to let off some fireworks. That turned out quite well for us though, because there was a music festival of various kinds of music on the banks of the river.
Magyarország az én hazám, itt nevelt fel apám, anyám. Itt ringattak a bölcsőbe, szép honnak szentölében. Azért olyan szép a világ, mert a szíve Magyarország. Nincs is többé áldott hona, ez a világ színe java. Nincs is többé áldott hona, ez a világ színe java.
As darkness fell, the music turned more jazzy. This was the Budapest Jazz Orchestra. We sat up on deck, drink in hand, and had a very delightful evening. Next day we arrived in Budapest very early in the morning. Am I the only one up? So I made myself a cup of tea from a dispenser and settled down on deck to watch the scene. After breakfast we had our tour of Pest and walked around the city. This is St. Stephen's Basilica. St. Stephen was crowned king in Esztergom on Christmas Day in the year 1000. Inside here, if you like that sort of thing, you can find his hand, the only bit they have left. This nearby sculpture is of course allegorical. That cute angel at the bottom represents Hungary and that nasty birdie at the top is Germany. Most tourists seem to find the fountains much more interesting though, and who could blame them? Just around the corner is the fat policeman. You must rub his belly if you have indigestion, or if you haven't. After lunch we crossed to Buda and went for a look at the castle. And just like Bratislava, it's at the top of another dirty great hill. The area has been extensively damaged over the years and there's an awful lot of rebuilding work going on at the moment to put it all back to rights. Still very much worth a visit though. A lot of the buildings in this castle area are being repurposed for government use, like this one, which is the office and headquarters of Viktor Orban, who's been in power for a surprisingly long time. So the castle hill is now an interesting blend of art and hardware. And this is Matthias Church, which seems to have escaped all the destruction and rebuilding. The views from up here are pretty splendid. This is the Parliament building over on the Pest side of the river. And there coming into view is St. Stephen's Basilica. This is the Fisherman's Bastion, because it's above the area where the fishermen used to live. They didn't fight any battles in it. Unless you count the battles you have to fight with the other tourists if you want to see the view. The Fisherman's Bastion was built in the late 19th century and I wonder if Walt Disney didn't pick up a clue or two from it. The streets around the castle are very handsome. There's paprika for sale everywhere and the odd entertaining statue. So this naked lady called outraged when she was put up and the locals started putting clothes on her overnight. Now they're used to it, and her bomb is gloriously naked. When we returned to the ship, hot and tired as we were, we found we couldn't go aboard because they were doing a bit of manoeuvring. If this cannon had been pointing the other way, I think Lynn might have been tempted to use it on them. Once back on board, we were soon restored. We we could spend our evening with a lovely final night dinner and the views of this wonderful city of Budapest. So that's it. It seemed like it was gone in a flash, but we had a wonderful time seeing the sights of these three fascinating countries, and all from the beautiful River Danube.